Right. Good morning, students. Am I audible? My screen is visible. Anyone? Okay. So, welcome to module 38, right? In the internal combustion engine subject, right? So, today we are entering to the unit 5, right? So, for the entering of unit 5, the topic is modern technologies in IC engines, right? So, what are the modern technologies are there, right? So in this unit we have to cover the HCCI engines, and then CRDI injections, GDI technologies, and the E turbochargers, and then variable compression ratio engines and variable valve timing technologies, and hybrid electric vehicles and the fuel cells and the hybrid technologies, hybrid engines, right? Hybrid vehicles, right? So we can discuss about the various technologies which is incorporated in nowadays, right? So the modern technologies, right? For the modern technologies in IC engines, we are going to discuss in the fifth unit, right? Why we have to go this type of engines, the modern technologies means the increase of the emission conditions, right? So due to the increasing the emissions of the greenhouse gases from the automobile engines, so it required to develop the clean technology in automobiles, right? So that's the main term, right? So for the emissions, right? So for the emissions we have got carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, then the nitrous oxides, right? So many emissions particles will be there, right? Particulate matters, so PM, right? So we have faced many difficulties on these emissions, right? So now also we are switching over to the BS6 engines, right? Why we have to switch over for the BS6 engines? Anyone? Anyone? Have you heard about the BS6 bar scale 6?
சார் புரியல சார் நீங்க கேக்குற கொஸ்டின்
என்னப்பா?
நீங்க கேக்குற கொஸ்டின் புரியல சார்
BS6 engines அப்படின்னு சொல்றோமா?
ஆமா சார்
What is that? Why we have to go for BS6 engines?
சார் BS4ல வந்து கேட்டலிட்டிக் கன்வெர்ட்டர் வந்து ஓரளவுக்கு பொல்யூஷன் கண்ட்ரோல் பண்ணும் சார். அதை விட இன்க்ரீஸ் பண்ணி கொடுத்துருப்பாங்க BS6 நார்ம்ஸ்ல, அவ்வளவுதான்.
Right. So the catalytic converter will convert the catalytic converter work is to reduce the harmful gases which is going out to the atmosphere, right? It reduces the masses, that is a pollution control, right? So emissions it will be reduces, right? So in that BS6 engines, right, so the emissions it's fully controllable, right? So the emission control will be high for the BS4 engines, right? So we have to reduce the emission which is produced in the engine itself, right? So we have to switch over to the BS6 engines, right? So that is one developed technology, right? That is one type of the developed technology, right? So that one type of the modern technologies which is used in IC engine. Why? So the increasing of the emission, due to the increasing of the emission, we have to develop a clean technology in the automobiles, right? So why? Because we have to reduce the emission. That's the main agenda, right? So that's the main agenda. So we have to develop a new type of the engines, new type of the technologies, right? So that's the main one, right? So here you can see the right. So here the engine emission, right? So engine emission we have to see, right? So due to the increasing of the emission of the greenhouse gases from the automobile engines, so it required to develop a clean technologies in the automobiles. That's the main one. That's the first one, right? Then the second one, right? So for the second one, the lower fuel consumption and the higher efficiency, right? The lower fuel consumption and the higher efficiency for the ambient gases, right? For the ambient air quality improvement, right? So we have to develop a new type of the technologies, right? So in earlier days, we can get a fuel consumption, the fuel economy, right? So will be low, right? So see, in the earlier days the consumption of fuel will be low, but nowadays you can see the fuel consumption will be gets higher, right? So we can, the fuel consumption will be increased by more than the 10 percentage in the last 7, right? So last 7 years, right? So it's very difficult one, right? So if we are going like this, means the fuel uh, economy will be very very bad one, right? So we have to supply the fuel into the engine will be in minimized, will be in optimized condition. So the lower fuel consumption is very required one, and for the higher efficiency, for the ambient air pure quality, right? So that's also a very important one. So we have to switch over, right? So how we can reduce, how we can challenge these two terms, right? One is the emission and second one is the fuel economy, right? So how we can uh, face these problems, right? So that we can see, right? So we have to face that problem, we have to reduce the noxes, and we have to have a low fuel consumptions by the new development technologies, by the new development technologies, right? So what's that? So for the, these are all the new developed technologies, right? So here in this class we are particularly, we have to see the first one, right? So HCCI engines, right? So in our fifth unit, sir, you can see hybrid vehicles. So here you can see the hybrid vehicles, then fuel cells, HCCI engines, GDI engines, then the low emission technologies, and what are the materials and what are the designs will be there to do all these things, right? So these term, right? So these term will be there in the fifth unit, right? So we have to face the many challenges, right? So mainly for the emission and the fuel economy. So for the solution will be these modern technologies, right? Solution for this these modern technologies, right? So while designing of these kind of the technologies, we have to consider some factors, right? We have to consider some factors for the higher compression ratios and the less homogeneous air fuel mixtures, then the complete and instantaneous burning, the combustions, right? So that and all we have to see, right? So in this class we are going to see about the HCCI engines, right? So what is the HCCI engine, right? So before seeing this HCCI engines, right, just we can see the introduction about the IC engines, right? So why we have to go for the HCCI engines, right? That we can see, right? So for the IC engines, right, it's a IC engines are primary source for all the transportation vehicles, the marine ships, then the construction equipments and agricultural machineries, among of the others, right? So the engine consumes, right? Normally the IC engine consumes the extremely large amount of the fuel to produce the power, and it will emit the poisonous or a harmless exhaust gases, right? So in the exhaust gases, which includes the carbon dioxide, hydrocarbons, then the NOx, right? So oxides of the nitrogens and the particular matters, PM, and the carbon dioxide, right? So these harmful gases, right? These harmful gases will be released from the through the exhaust gas to the atmosphere, right? So the pollution will be high, right? The emission pollution will be high, right? So in the compression ignition, that is the CI engines and the spark ignition SI engines are the new, sorry, the CI engine and the spark ignition engine, right? So two type of engine we have studied in IC engine, right? So the two technologies established in automobile sector, uh, the SI engine and the CI engine use the fossil fuels, right? And the we have to use the both for the merit, that is for the advantages and the disadvantages, right? Then The characteristic features of the traditional SI engine is the flame propagation, right? The flame propagation for the combustion, right? The conventional SI engine uses the homogeneous fuel and air mixture, right? So which is prepared in the intake port, right? Which is prepared in the intake port, and it undergoes the induction compression, right? Induction compression, right? So in the SI engines, with accurate control of the fuel and air ratio by using the uh, carburetor, right? So the SI engines with accurate control of the air and the fuel ratio, and a three-way catalytic converter, right? So why we have to use the catalytic converter, right? It will absorb the particles, right? The hydrocarbon particles, the emission particles, right? It will absorb the emission particles, and it will release some the less amount of the harmful gases to the atmosphere, right? So the three-way catalytic converters are a very clean power producing the machines, right? Power producing machines, but their efficiency is limited because of the throttling and knocking and the lean flammable limit, right? So these are the difficulties, right? So in the SI engines we have to control the air fuel ratio, right? And we have to use the three-way catalytic converter, right? Or the very clean power producing machines, but their efficiency is limited because of the throttling, knocking, and the lean flammability limit, right? And conventional CI engines, right? So now the CI engines, right? So in the CI engine uses the heterogeneous mixture. We have to see in CI engines the heterogeneous fuel and air supply will be there, right? So in the CI engines only the fraction of the air and the fuel is pre-mixed and the burns fast, right? So where the large part of the fuels, the time scale of the evaporation diffusions, right? So that we have to consider, right? The large amount of fuels and the time of scale will be more than the chemical time scale, right? Than the chemical time scale. Hence, the fuel and air mixes, right, within the combustion chamber and divided into two regions, right? So the high fuel concentration regions, right? So where the high fuel will be accumulated, right? So the high fuel concentration regions and the high temperature flame regions, right? So in the SCI engine, we have to see the high fuel region and high temperature region, right? So in the rich mixture, in this fuel rich regions, the rate of shoot formation is high due to the absence of the oxygen content, due to the absence of it is incomplete burning, right? So incomplete burning, right? So insufficient due to the absence of the oxygen, it will be the burning will be a incompletion one, right? So the hydrocarbon fuels will have the soot formation, it will create the soot formation, right? Then the emission terms, the NOx, right? The oxides of the nitrogen is produced at the higher rate, is produced at higher rate in the temperature region, right? So here you can see in CI engines we have two regions. One is the high fuel region, one is the accumulated fuel will be high in particular region, right? So that term is called the high fuel region. And we have the high temperature region, two regions are there, right? So for the high fuel region, the fuel rich will be there, right? The fuel rich region, right? So there in the fuel rich region, the insufficient oxygen will be there, right? So the absence of the oxygen will be there, so the shoot formation emission will be high, right? So for shoot formation emission will be high. And for the high temperature region, we can get, it will produce the oxides of the nitrogen emission, oxides of the nitrogen emissions, right? So for the CI engines, you can see here, in we have more concentrated on the NOx and the soot, right? So only is the NOx and one more is the soot, right? So the incomplete burning of the fuel, right? So insufficient burning of oxygen to burn the fuel, right? Then the soot formation emission will be produces, right? So in the high temperature regions we can get the NOx, right? So oxides of the nitrogen emission will be producers, right? So in CI engine we have, see, these two types of the emissions, right? So the CI engines are a very efficient power producing machine, but they have the constrained form of the NOx and the emissions, right? Soot emissions, right? Particular mass emissions, right? That's called the PM emissions, right? So we have faced the more challenges. We have faced the more challenges in the normal IC engines, that is the SI engines and the CI engines, right? So we have to introduce some new technologies, right? We have to introduce to new technologies to overcome the difficulties which is facing in the normal conventional SI and the CI engines, right? So that solution will gives the somewhat better fuel consumption and somewhat better the emission control, right? So in particularly in this class we are going to see about the introduction of the HCCI engines, right? HCCI engines, right? So the HCCI represents uh, the major step beyond the high efficiency CI engines, the high efficiency CI engines and the SI engines, high efficiency CI engines and the high efficiency the SI engines, right? So uh, in some regard, the HCCI engine incorporated the best features of the both SI engine and the CI engines, right? So you can see the SI engines and the C engines, right? The HCCI, right? So what is HCCI? We are discussing about the HCCI, right? So what is that HCCI means? The homogeneous charge compression ignition, right? So homogeneous charge compression ignition engines, right? So that is called the HCCI engines, right? So you may note that the homogeneous charge compression ignition engine, that is the HCCI engines, right? That's the full form of the HCCI engines, right? So the HCCI engine incorporated the best features of the both SI engines and the CI engines, right? So SI engines and the CI engines, like an SI engine charges will mixed with the max minimum particulate emissions, right? So the like the SI engine charges is well mixed with a minimized particular emission, and like a CI engines, right? So it compression ignited, right? It is the compression ignited and has the no throttling losses and no throttling losses, right? So that you have to note, right? So there is no throttling losses, so which leads the high efficiency, right? So the SCCI is a potential applicable to both light and the heavy duty engines, right? So it is potentially applicable to both, right? So either it is a light type vehicle or a heavy type engines, right? So for the light duty, so this type of engines can run on the gasolines or a petrol, right? So for the light duty vehicles, the HSCI engine can run on the gasoline, right? And it have the potential to match or they exceed the efficiency of the diesel fueled CI engines, efficiency of the diesel fueled CI engines. So without the major challenge of the NOx and the particular matter emissions. Particular matter emissions. Okay, right. So for the particular matter emissions, right? So that you can see. Then the HCCI engines can be operated on the gasoline, diesel fuels, and most of the alternative fuels, right? So for the the HCCI engines have the low emission of the NOx, no emission of the NOx, and the particular matter, right? Particular that is represented as the PM, right? So it is, but relatively the high emission of the carbon, our hydrocarbons and the carbon monoxide, right? So generally, why we have to use the catalytic converters? Anyone? What is the function of the catalytic converter? Anyone? Pollution control பண்ணுது, right? Right. So how it will control the pollution? So mainly for the catalytic converter, it will controls what are the hydrocarbons, then what are the carbon monoxide, and how the carbon dioxide, right? So it will be exhaust from the exhaust gas, right? It will be released from the exhaust gas. So it will controls the hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and the carbon dioxide. This particular will be controlled by the catalytic converter, right? So that is the main working of the catalytic converter, right? But it will not control the NOx and the soot or a particular matter emissions, right? So in the modern type of technologies, right, in HCCI engines, it will reduces, right? So it will reduces, or it will have the low emission of the NOxes and the particular mass emissions. But in this type of engines will have the high emission of the hydrocarbon, carbon monoxide, and the carbon dioxide. But it is easy to control, right? So in this emission, we have to control the hydrocarbon emissions, the carbon monoxide emissions, but we can't control the NOx emissions, right? So in HCCI engines, you can see here the low emissions of the NOx will be there, but high emissions of the hydrocarbon and the carbon monoxide, and that particles will be there, right? So the reducing of the hydrocarbon and the carbon monoxide emission is much easier than the control of the NOx and the other particular matters from the CI engines, right? So the HCCI engine technologies is most promising technology in future to reduce the emission for the clean environment, for the clean environment, right? So this is about the introduction about the HCCI engines, right? So what is the HCCI engine, right? For the HCCI engine is the homogeneous charge compression ignition, right? So that is, you may remember that one, right? So it's a remembered term, right? So HCCI engines, right? So all the books we have, all the terms we have HCCI, right? But we have to know the full form of the HCCI engines, right? So what is that? The homogeneous compression, homogeneous charge compression ignition engines, right? So it is used in both CI and the SI engines, right? So for the SI engines, right, the air fuel mixture is well mixed, right? So it will minimize the particulate emissions, right? So the particulate emissions or particular matters, right? So it will be called as the PM, right? So most probably the emissions will be denoted by NOx and the particular matters and the hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, right? So these are the emissions, right? So here you can see, so these three, the hydrocarbon, carbon monoxide, and the carbon dioxide, right? So it will be easily controllable one, right? So these three are easily controllable one, but the NOx and the particular matters, right? So the shoot, right? So the shoot, so here the NOx and shoot formations will not be controllable ones, right? Right. So we have to reduce these terms. We have to reduce these two, right? So in HCCI engines, right? In HCCI engines, it will reduces the emission of the NOx and the particular masses, right? Particular matters, right? So in HCCI engine, you may remember this one. In HCCI engine, it will reduce, right? It will reduce the emission of the NOx and the particular matter emission, but at the same time it will increase, right? It will increase, and we can get the high emission, we can get the high emission of the hydrocarbon, carbon monoxide, right? Emission, right? But we can know, we know, right? So these hydrocarbon and carbon monoxide will be easily controllable one, right? We can reduce easily by using the catalytic converter, right? So this type of HCCI engine, it's a one type of the modern technology which is used for the low emission. Is it clear? புரிஞ்சாப்பா இது என்னன்னு ஜஸ்ட் பேசிக்கா சொல்லியிருக்கேன். HCCI engine அப்படின்னா என்ன ஆகும், நம்மளுக்கு வந்து ப்ரொடியூஸ் ஆகக்கூடிய எமிஷன் இதுதான், இந்த 5 தான், கரெக்டா? ஸோ கார்பன், hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, right? And NOx and particular matters, right? So in these 5, these 3 are easily we can reduce the emission, right? இதுல வந்து நம்ம என்ன பண்ணலாம், easily we can reduce the emission in these 3, right? So we can't reduce, right? We can't reduce emission on the NOx and the PM shoots, right? So we have to reduce these two NOxes, sorry, these two emissions by the new technology. That technology is called the HCCI engine, correct? HCCI engine, right? So what is the HCCI combustion? That we can see, correct? That we can see. What is HCCI combustion, right? So in HCCI mode of combustion, the fuel and the air is mixed prior to the start of the combustion, and mixes is auto ignited. You may note this one, right? So what is the auto ignition? What is auto ignition? Anyone? Auto ignition, what is that?
பெட்ரோல் தானா இக்னிட் ஆகுது,
என்னப்பா?
பெட்ரோல் தானா இக்னிட் ஆகுது,
right? So the fuel gets ignite in automatically, right? So here in SI engines, right? For the in SI engines, right? How the fuel will be ignites in SI engines, you can see here, right? The air and fuel mixture will be comes to the inlet valve, and it will be spreads over here, right? During the suction stroke it will be intakes, and after the compression stroke it will be compressed, right? So while compressing, what will happen, it will increase the compression, so the temperature will be increases, the air fuel ratio temperature will be increases, then the spark will be produces from the spark plug, so the flame will be propagates, the flame will be propagates, right? It is in the SI engines. But in CI engines, but in HCCI engines, so what will happen means the fuel and air will be mixed period to the start of the combustion, right? So in the combustion chamber, the fuel and air will be, the fuel air mixture will be compressed in high ratio, compressed in the high ratio. So it will increase the pressure, and it will increase the temperature. That temperature is beyond the auto ignition of the fuel, beyond the auto ignition of the fuel. So what will happen, so without the spark plug or without the sparks from the spark plug, so the fuels may get some burning. Correct idea, right? The fuel may get some burning, right? So that is called the HCCI engine, right? So in this HCCI mode of combustion, the fuel and air is mixed prior to the start of the combustion chamber, right? Prior to the start of the combustion, the mixer is auto ignited, right, spontaneously at the multiple site throughout the charge volume due to increase the temperature of the compression stroke, right? So due to increase in the compression stroke, right? So in this mode, the combustion process is arranged in such a way that the combustion takes place under a very lean and the dilute mixture conditions, right? So may note this one, right? So in HCCI combustion mode, the combustion process is arranged, right? The combustion process is arranged, right, in such a way that the combustion takes place under a very lean and diluted mixture conditions, right? So which results in comparatively the lower bulk temperature and the localized combustion temperature. So hence therefore the considerably it will reduces the NOx emission. Considerably it will reduces the NOx emission. So furthermore it will be unlike the conventional CI combustions. In CI combustions, right? So the sorry, right, in CI combustion the fuel and air is well mixed, that is the homogeneous, right? So for the SI engines we are using the heterogeneous, uh, for CI engines we are using the homogeneous, right? So the absence of the rich fuel mixture region in the combustion chamber is a result in considerably it will reduces the particular, that is the emission, particular matter emission, right? So therefore the absence of the local high temperatures, absence of the local high temperatures and the rich air fuel mixtures during the combustion process is simultaneously it will reduces the NOx and the particular matter emissions, right? So here you can see, just wait. Right. So here we can see the paper, the journal. Anyone? Anyone? Yes. Right. So in this diagram you can see here, right? So in HCCI engines you may see the systematic diagram of the HCCI, right? So how the HCCI will be there, right? Um, how the fuel will be gets in auto ignition mode means in petrol engine and the diesel engine, right? So what will happen? So for the intake, right? For the intake, the air will be supplied and the more amount of air right, the more amount of oxygen will be there in the atmospheric air. So the high compression ratio will be, we can get in a diesel engines, right? So while compressing, what will happen? The inside the combustion chamber we have the air, right? So that will be compressed, right? So due to the compression of what will happen, it will increase the pressure as well as the temperature, right? So while the temperature will be high, right, on the time we have to spray the fuels, on the time we have to spray the fuels, and the compressed temperature is enough to burn the fuel in the from the fuel injector, right? Is it correct? In diesel engines, right? So for the petrol engines, right, for the petrol engines, what will happen? And the air and fuel mixture will gets into the inlet valve and it will be compressed, right? So due to the compression, what will happen? The pressure and the temperature will be increases, right? So after increasing the pressure and the temperature, so what will happen? The spark has to be produced, right? So due to the spark, what will happen? The fuel gets ignited, right? It is in the petrol engines, right? But in HCCI engines, right, in HCCI engines, right, so here the same, right, the air and fuel mixtures will be in the combustion chamber, right? In the combustion chamber the air and fuel mixture will be there, right? So in that air and fuel mixture, here it will be separates in a multi terms, right? So it will be converted into the multi ignition points. It will be converted into multi ignition points. So what will happen? So once the compression stroke will be there, right? So during the compression stroke, it will increases the pressure and it will increases the temperature also, right? So once if the fuel will be in a smaller particles, right, it will be in multi parts, right, it will be in multi charger points, right? So while it is in a multi point, right, while it is in the multi point, so then it will be easily it will be burns, right? So for example, if you have a bulk amount of the fuel, if you have a bulk amount of the fuel, so it may get some high temperature to ignite the fuel, right? But if it is in mist form, it is in fuel fine droplet forms, right? So then it will be burns in easy manner. Is it clear or not? Right? So in HCCI engines, this type of technology we are using here, right? So we have to split the fuels, right? We have to split the air fuel mixture ratio into multiple point ignition, right? We have to convert into multiple point ignition. Then uh, in next class we can see how the multiple points will be generated, right? So how the multiple points, right? So from the air fuel mixture, right? So here also we have to supply the air fuel mixture. In this diesel engine, the combustion chamber will have the air fuel mixture. In petrol engines we have the air fuel mixture. In HCCI engine also we have the air fuel mixture, but in HCCI engines we have get the multi ignition points, but here it is not there. In diesel engines and the petrol engines it will not there in this technology, but in HCCI engines we have the multi-point ignitions, right? Then how we can get this multi-point ignition, that we can see in the next class, right? So in this class we have just give the introduction about the what is HCCI engine, right? So the mainly, right, so in this class we have given the introduction about the HCCI engine. What is the HCCI engine? Then why we have to go for the technology? Only for the emission. Only for the emission we have to go for that technology, HCCI engines. Right? Is it clear? Is it clear? Why we have to go for the HCCI engines? And what are the drawbacks are there in the conventional SI and the CI engines? Right? So only for the emission control, we have to switch over the new technologies, right? So in this new technology, the first one is the HCCI engines, right? So that is a modern technology in the IC engines, right? So do you have any doubt in this class? Just we can give about the introduction. That's all. We have given the introduction about the HCCI engines, right? Then how the HCCI engines will be working, right? So the working will be we can see in the next class. Do you have any doubt in this class?
No, sir.
Right. So then you can leave the class. You can join the other class. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.